Hello, my name is Michiel. I'm a Shakespeare scholar, as they call that, and I was asked to tell you a little bit about William Shakespeare. 5 minutes, they said. Well, that's a bit short. I could talk hours and hours about Shakespeare. So there's a lot to say about Shakespeare, and on the other hand, there's also only a little bit to say about Shakespeare. A lot of the things about Shakespeare we do not know. We can only guess because we know a little bit about his time and his circumstances. How is it possible that we don't know about it? Because Shakespeare, most of his life, he led a secret life. He did not want to know anybody, any specifics about him. So any personal letter was hidden or destroyed. So the only writings that we have from him are his plays and his poetry. Talk a little bit more about his life. He was born in 1564. That is more than 400 years ago already. He was born in a place called Stratford upon Avon. It's about an hour drive from Oxford that you can still see that is related to Shakespeare there. For example, the place where he was born, the house that John and Mary Shakespeare living at that time on Henley Street. But also the place where his mother came from. She came from the Arden family. She was descended from Robert Arden, a very well-known Catholic family in that time. We even gave martyrs. So a martyr is somebody who gives his life for his faith. From his mother's side, he was raised as a Catholic. Father's side as well. We know that because his father was hiding a document in his house that was found later on that stated that he was a Catholic and wanted to remain that till the end of his life, even in difficult circumstances. And a reason for Shakespeare to keep a lot of his life a secret, because if it's a secret, then they cannot arrest him or put him in jail or give him a fine or anything like that. If people tell you that Shakespeare had a boring life or that Shakespeare didn't do anything exciting, then you know that that is not true, because Shakespeare had a very exciting life and he was always flying for people, trying to hide himself for those who wanted to put him in jail or even worse than that. We don't know exactly when Shakespeare was born, but we think it was the 23rd of April in 1564, because it was usual for that 3 days after you were born you were baptized, and we know that Shakespeare was baptized on the 26th of April in Holy Trinity Church, and that is quite interesting because he also died on the 23rd of April. So a lot of people say, oh, that is tragic that you die on your birthday, because his life was very tragic. But it started all in school, of course. Everybody learns in school. It is very interesting that the school in Stratford upon Avon, where Shakespeare used to go, is now open for public. We don't know exactly how old Shakespeare was when he left school, but we have no recording, no sources what happened with Shakespeare after he left school. That is to say, no records in Stratford upon Avon. But there is a theory, and now we come in Shakespeare's hidden life. There is a source of a testament from Alexander Houghton, and he was in Houghton Tower, that is in Liverpool area. You can still visit that as well, and there he also had a secret library and a secret church for the Catholics, and he was the person who gave a certain Shakespeare, who was a player, a place in his testament. So some people say this Shakespeare might be Shakespeare, because the grandfather from William Shakespeare also wrote his name is as Shakespeare. If that is so, then we know that he already was a player in that time. We know that in 1582 Houghton Tower closed. We also know that Edmund Campion was betrayed and became a martyr. If William was there, then he must have escaped. The next documentation that we have about it, and is also out from 1582, gets the permission to marry Anne Hathaway. Shakespeare was very young. He was only 18 when he married, and his wife was already a bit older than he. He was 26. They got children. First, Susanna, and after that, twins in 1985, Hamlet and Judith. But Hamlet, his son, he did not become very old. He died already when the age of 11 in 1596. But both Susanna and Judith, they grew up and married. And Susanna, she married with the local doctor, that was John Hall, and his house, including his practice, you can also see Holscroft. So there are several sources who talk about the sheriff from that time, Sir Thomas Lucy, from Charlecote Park, and he was a very ardent Catholic hunter. And he, according to a source, had Shakespeare already whipped several times, and that became so dangerous that they thought that the next time he would not be so merciful. So that's why Shakespeare decided to leave Stratford-upon-Avon and go into a different direction. From then on, we have no records anymore. So those are also the lost years from Shakespeare, which is about 10 years that we do not know for sure where he was. Some people say he traveled abroad, maybe to Italy, because he has a lot of knowledge about Italy that he shows in his works. Some people say he studied in Rome, English Catholic seminary. Some people even think that they found signatures of him there. Others say that he went to Rufford Old Hall, that is again in Liverpool area. There he was connected with Ferdinando Stanley, the Earl of Derby, Lord Strange. We do know he later did indeed join Lord Strange, because Lord Strange has a theatre company, and that was called the Lord Strange's Men. Later that changed his name, King's Men. That was in the time that King James came on the throne and became the patron from Shakespeare. So we know for sure that in 1592 Shakespeare arrived London. There he started as a playwright and an actor. We know that because there's a source from Robert Greene, who was not very fond of Shakespeare. That is technically the first negative review that we hear about Shakespeare. But we do know that Shakespeare was already playing in that time. And that went on for a few years till the plague broke out again. You see, Shakespeare's life is never safe. And in that time he moved to Titchfield, all the way in South England, in Titchfield Abbey. And there he found a new patron, and that was Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton. Can visit Titchfield Abbey and see where Shakespeare stayed for at least 2 years, where he was during the plague. And there he wrote not plays, but his poetry, and he also dedicated that poetry to his patron. He discussed his poetry with his cousin, who was also a Jesuit priest, Robert Southwell, very famous because he became canonized later on as a martyr as well. In 1594, when he goes back to London and the theatres are opened again, Shakespeare has a very long career in London, but not that he was safe there, because we know that Shakespeare was constantly moving house. Then he lived there, all kinds of places, so that he could not be pinned down on one place. Shakespeare had a lot of interesting adventures there. So there was, for example, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, who tried to get Queen Elizabeth from the throne. He wanted to plot against Queen Elizabeth, and he asked Shakespeare's company to play Richard II, a very famous play that is also about plotting against a king, and he hoped that all the people would join him then in his uprising. He was betrayed and executed, and later on a similar adventure happened in the time from King James. Shakespeare's family was very involved in the gunpowder plot. We still think about it every 5th of November. All the cousins and brothers-in-law of Shakespeare were very against King James with his anti-Catholic measures, so that they wanted to plot against him. Shakespeare himself was not so for plotting that time anyway, because we know that he wrote the play Macbeth for King James, in which he wanted to warn the king. But he also wrote in that time Hamlet, which is also about plotting against the king. But that play is very detailed about the dangers about plotting against the king. Also Shakespeare's family there, all his cousins and brothers-in-law who were involved in the gunpowder plot, they were all executed. So you can imagine that after that Shakespeare was a bit depressed and sad, and that's why his darkest plays come in the end of his life, so King Lear and so on. We know that Shakespeare invested a lot in buildings. That is what is all recorded. For example, the Globe Theatre, but also the Blackfriars Theatre, that doesn't exist anymore. But the Globe Theatre, well, that burned down during one of the premieres of a very controversial piece, Henry VIII, or All is True. After that, it was not rebuilt during Shakespeare's own life, but later on they rebuilt it. So now in London you can visit the Globe, and that is a reconstruction of the Globe that was there in Shakespeare's time. When Shakespeare got a bit older, Sheriff Lucy became older as well, and he died. And after the sheriff died, Shakespeare thought it was safe to return to Stratford-upon-Avon. Some people think that that was because he retired, that he did not want to write any plays anymore. That's not sure. Some people say even in Stratford-upon-Avon he still wrote some plays like The Tempest. We don't know for sure when Shakespeare stopped working or if he ever stopped working. We do know that he died in 1616. He was only 56 years old. So people say maybe he was old for that time, but also people say no, he was still very vital. We don't know exactly what the reason was that Shakespeare died. So there's one source who says that he died after drinking too much. There's also a professor who examines signatures, and he says that based on the several signatures that you see on Shakespeare's last will and testament, that he was probably poisoned. There are all kinds of interesting theories about Shakespeare's life and also about his death. We know that he is buried in Holy Trinity Church, the same church where he was baptized. He is buried there together with his wife, also his daughter, Susanna, is there. Judith is not with them. If you read his last will and testament, it turns out that he was not so pleased about Judith and her husband. She is in the graveyard outside, and the grave of his son Hamlet is unknown, because in that time, if you died of the plague, you were put in a mass grave. So, as I said, there is a lot more to say about Shakespeare and his adventures, but for now we'll keep it to this. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I cannot answer them via this, but maybe we meet another time and then we can talk a little bit more about him. I hope that you enjoyed it, and hopefully you will read your Shakespeare, because he was a very smart man that you can learn a lot from. So keep reading and keep watching his plays.